Chapter Master Hyperion of the Stormblade sat alone in the chamber of the chapter flagship, Serenity's Wrath, methodically disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling his bolt pistol. This was the third time he had stripped and cleaned the weapon. It was not because the pistol required such maintenance, it was as clean as if it had come fresh from the forges. But it was a meditative trick Hyperion had been taught as a squire long ago, to help centre his thoughts on the moment. Concentrate on one part at a time, and eventually it all comes together as a working whole. It was a lesson that was taught to him less subtly by his sergeant when he first became a full knight of the chapter. Focus on and defeat the foe in front of you, then move on to the next one. Eventually there will be no more foes and the battle will be won. A simplistic message, but still valuable. And Hyperion needed to concentrate his mind and focus his thoughts. The sheer load of conflicting information in his brain would crush a mortal into madness, and even cause a space marine such as himself to doubt. So, focus on one thought at a time. First thought, the battle just occurred. 103 casualties, 4 vehicles destroyed, 99 of the slain had their gene seed recovered, high proportional losses, although it could have been worse, minimal gene seed loss, which was something. The battle had allowed some of the newer warriors to bloody themselves against the traitor foe, to learn and adjust tactics for future battles. But what was the intent of the battle was the issue still in Hyperion's mind. What was the point? Azrael and the Dark Angels had called upon all the Sons of the Lion to face down the Black Legion and oppose Abaddon and his demonic allies' plans. Hyperion had answered the call and led 700 knights of his chapter in the operation, pleased that the successors of the First Legion were called to fight the foes of the Emperor and not more of the dark sins of the Dark Angels, only to find instead the twisted reborn world of Caliban before them, and all hopes Hyperion had of honour and glory were dashed. Curse the Dark Angels for all their eternal sins and damnation, and curse them for forcing it upon their children. So the Stormblades had fought. Their ships had battled relentlessly in the void, while Hyperion himself led 500 Stormblades to the surface of the demon world. There they had found monstrous demon engines, traitor legionaries, and corruption of the foulest kind. And they had fought. Hyperion had fought with fist, blade, and bolt gun. And then he saw him. 2.31 seconds according to his helmet's recording system. That was all he got. But he saw him. He knew him, even though he had only seen him in drawings and statues of ages long past. Lion L. Johnson, his Primarch, his Lord, battling his monstrous brother Angron. The Lion blocking a massive demonic blade of his brother with a glittering golden shield. The Lion was magnificent, and Hyperion's heart shone in his chest at the sight, until a chain axe cutting into his shoulder blade and tearing into the meat of his shoulder roused him back to his own battle. A power fist to the side of the World Eater's head and a thrust to the chest with his mighty longsword killed the traitor outright. But when Hyperion looked back, the Lion and Angron had gone. Hyperion had known that those 2.31 seconds would be burned into his memory for all time. He had seen a Primarch before, the Lord Guilliman of Ultramar, seen from a distance at the great conclave between the First Legion and the Avenging Sun. If someone had told him a decade ago that in his lifetime he would see not one, but 2 of the Emperor's loyal sons returned, he would have laughed and called the one who spoke such things a naive dreamer of the most deluded sort. Seeing the Lion was a great thing, a majestic thing, and it did rest upon his mind, like how a wild frost bear of Telenor's northern mountain ranges rested upon a fresh kill in its cave. But it was what he saw next that weighed on his mind more. Nearby where Hyperion had seen the Lion, he'd seen a large number of them. It was obvious who they were. Fallen angels, former warriors of the First Legion of old, not in service to the traitors' forces, but battling against them, fighting against World Eaters and Black Legion alike. It was obvious to Hyperion that these Fallen were in service of the Lion. He could just tell, and he could see the implications of such, and it burned on Hyperion's soul. All of the fallen that had proclaimed loyalty to the lions, that he, his brothers and his cousins had turned over to the chains, whips and barbs of the Dark Angels, were they in fact innocent? Were they telling the truth? Were they working for the lion all this time? Were all the fallen who had professed guilt over the last 10,000 years and claimed servitude to the lion and the emperor, had they been truly serving the Primarch all this time? Hyperion always knew that the Dark Angels were morally wrong for their dark crusade against the fallen, the dark deeds they had committed upon the Imperium and forced their successors to commit. But now Hyperion had wondered if they had always been traitors to the lion, from the first fallen they had tortured and slain, until now. Not that all the fallen encountered were innocent of crimes. Many had pledged service to the dark gods of chaos, or openly declared their loyalty and hatred of the lion and the emperor, but Hyperion did wonder to himself, how many of those had been forced into such a path? Damned survival or death by the torturous knives of the Dark Angels? There were many that would choose survival over the alternative. How to confront such a thing? Well, just like when he was confronted with a traitor dreadnought back when he was still a squire in 10th Company, he couldn't. Fall back and let those who can deal with it, deal with it. Focus on the foes that can be defeated with your blade. The lion would decide the fate of the unforgiven, and Hyperion would gladly submit himself to that fate on behalf of his chapter for the sins of the past. The next issue, the ongoing reconstruction of Talonor. Of the 30 million people that had called the world home before the Scouring, only 19,156 remained after the World Eaters had left the world. Majority of these were members of the mining communities in the northern mountain zone, hiding deep underground in the labyrinthine tunnels of the mountains for safety. The World Eaters had gotten bored and moved on to fresh worlds to despoil and butcher, leaving this pitiful handful of remnants alone in the dark, until Hyperion and the remnants of the chapter came and found them. Those survivors, plus the 30,000 native Telenorian mortal crew members of Hyperion's flotilla, were all that was left of an entire world's population. The forests burned, cities razed, all darkness and despair, although all not was truly lost. Calling in favours and pulling in resources from neighbouring systems, the rebuild had begun. Calling in an ancient oath, the Stormblades had their cousin chapter of the Iron Knights, true sons and successors of Dawn, designed for the Stormblades a new fortress monastery. Masters of siege warfare, the Iron Knights representative had designed a mighty redoubt for the chapter to build and call their own. Although the chapter's tech marines and the local mechanicums working on its construction estimated that would take 70 to 100 years to complete to full specifications, with the remaining settlements being rebuilt using prefabricated STC housing and mini hives, the reconstruction was ongoing, and they would rebuild what was lost. The loss of culture, traditions and the lifestyle of Telenor, however, was a bitter blow that could never truly be replaced. The people themselves, humans, mortals, were easily replaced, but the identity, the knightly order of the mortals of the homeworld, had given the chapter its culture, honour, traditions and strength, were almost all lost, and only fragments remained. The burned settlements were repopulated. Refugees fleeing the great ruination of the Great Rift had arrived to take up residence on the homeworld. 50 million refugees. 50 million refugees Telenor had agreed to take in, more than the original populace of the homeworld. Hyperion had broken them up, mixed them together, given them mayors, leaders and civil officials from the remaining members of the original population, instructed the chapter's chaplains to preach and instruct the mortals on the stories, traditions and leaderships of their new adopted world. Hyperion did this as necessity. It was too easy for refugees to stick together with others of their own worlds, keeping their own culture and identity, forming their own segregated communities to the exclusion of others, especially over the cultures of the world that they now inhabited. So Hyperion had sought to do all he could to forcibly integrate them to the culture of Telenor. So much had been lost and would never be the same again. like gaps in an ice shelf after a summer melt, and what would be left would be only a shadow. But a shadow was better than nothing. Hyperion's mind focused as he reassembled the spring housings of his magazines. Keep doing what was necessary to protect the culture and accept what was lost would never be the same again. Adjust as necessary, intervene as required. Moving on to his next opponent, the changing nature of the universe. The Primaris Marines, of which Hyperion secretly disliked, even though he was one himself now, they were now the dominant force of the chapter after the losses occurred during the fall of the homeworld and the wars that followed. Just under 200 of the firstborn Marines of the chapter remained. The Primaris had adopted to the chapter's ideology and tactics well enough. A few silently complained, preferring the rigid tactics of the Codex and their own ingrained Martian Terran doctrines, but they had all complied, however reluctantly. Hyperion had ensured that none of the Primaris had anything to do with the hunt for the Fallen, the curse that the Dark Angels had inflicted upon their offspring. Small ships crewed by the remaining members of the 200 were sent, while the Primaris themselves were sent headfirst into battle. No member of the Primaris would be inducted into the Inner Circle. Hyperion himself had decreed this to the other chapters of the Inner Circle. Publicly, to the Inner Circle, this was because of the risk of discovery by the Primaris Marines, but privately, Hyperion did this so that once the last of the 200 died, the curse of the Dark Angels would die with them. The chapter would be reborn as free knights, ready to serve the honor of the Lion, the Emperor, and the Imperium. Still, the ever-pervasive inclusion of Primaris into the Astartes chapters was a silent concern of his. There was talk going around about forcing all remaining firstborn to be turned into Primaris forcefully. There was talk about removing all versions of firstborn squads, all of their ranks, customs and traditions, abolishing Sternguard veterans, Vanguard veterans, and all of the distinguished Astartes unit types they have built up over the 10,000 years. Most concerning, though, was the rumours on stopping all production and maintenance of the Castoferum dreadnoughts. Hyperion would be damned if he ever abandoned his chapter's remaining venerable ancients. The chapter only had 4 left, one of them being Brother Suchet, the only remaining Marine from the burning of Telenor, found buried under a pile of rubble and bodies of his dead brothers. He and his new Hellfire chassis had become a standard, a symbol of the firstborn of the chapter to rally behind. The new model of dreadnoughts, the Redemptors, they were ugly, unholy machines in Hyperion's eyes, mere tools of war that burned out its pilots with ease. The ancients of the chapter were not just weapons, they were keepers of the chapter's lore and history, links to the past to spread their knowledge, experience and lore down to the new generations of Marines that followed them. These new dreadnoughts were just disposable weapons, a symbol of the new militant industrial way of thinking being adopted by the Imperium after Lord Guilliman's return. Everything is the same weapons, same tactics, all just ultramarines in different livery, following the blind tactical doctrine of the Codex and the Mechanicum. Not that Hyperion could do much about the wider galaxy, but keeping the old traditions and old order alive in his own chapter as much as he could, for as long as he yet lived, would at least slow the new spread of this ideological taint in his own ranks. Although there was hope for the teaching of the old knightly ways still, Brother Bessier, the first Marine to be inducted and made a full brother of the chapter after scouring of Telenor, Bessier was a young refugee on the first wave of refugee ships colonizing the homeworld. He was the first to be inducted as solely a Primaris Marine, and he was becoming a symbol of the new way, not filled with the Martian dogma of Guilliman's reinforcement Marines that had arrived first, but of something new. The young squire had been speed inducted into the chapter and had taken to becoming a knight with youthful passion and vigour, striving evermore to prove himself on the field of battle with his older brothers. Perhaps there was hope yet. So many things to consider, so many battles to fight. Hyperion preferred the days back when he was a captain. He had room to focus his mind back then, not struggling to pick his heart in a wave of battles which needed to be each fought. A chiming from the room speaker systems roused Hyperion from his rumination. 60 seconds to warp translation. Hyperion finished reassembling his bolt pistol and made to summon his attendants to help put on his armor before he headed out to the bridge. Which battle do you fight first? Hyperion thought to himself. That was easy. The one directly in front of you.